He wasn't just a defensive back. He was a force of nature. When Jack Tatum stepped onto the gridiron, he brought with him the shadow of fear, a presence that reshaped the very soul of defensive football. Nicknamed the Assassin, Tatum became both a symbol of intimidation and a lightning rod for controversy, a man who embodied the ruthless physicality of the NFL's golden era. But behind the bone-crushing hits and the legendary highlights was a story of grit, triumph, and the human cost of playing the game at its most brutal edge. This is the saga of Jack Tatum, the man who defined what it meant to strike fear into opponents, and whose name still echoes in debates about toughness, violence, and legacy in professional football. Jack Tatum's journey began far from fame, in Cherryville, North Carolina, where he was born on November 18, 1948. Life in Cherryville was simple, tough, and modest, and Tatum's family embodied the hard-working grit of the South. When Jack was still a child, his family moved north to Passaic, New Jersey, chasing better opportunities, but finding instead a rough and unforgiving city. Passaic was a place of factory smoke and tight streets, where survival demanded strength, discipline, and an unshakable edge. It was here that Jack developed the steel in his character, resilience forged in hardship, a toughness that would soon set him apart from his peers. At Passaic High School, Tatum first made his mark on the football field. Initially, he played on offense as a running back, showing quickness and determination, but what his coaches noticed most was his competitive fire. He played with a chip on his shoulder, never backing down, and hitting with an intensity that startled even seasoned players. Though he wasn't the biggest, his fearlessness made him unforgettable. By his junior year, local whispers grew louder. Jack Tatum had something rare, a raw physicality and instinct that couldn't be taught. That promise earned him a ticket to one of college football's great proving grounds, Ohio State University, under the legendary coach Woody Hayes. Hayes saw something in Tatum that others missed. Though recruited as a running back, Hayes made a bold decision. He shifted him to defense. It was a move that changed everything. On defense, Tatum wasn't just running with the ball. He was hunting it. His ferocious style found its true home, and he quickly became the cornerstone of the Buckeyes' defense. By 1968, Tatum's reputation exploded onto the national stage. As part of a dominant Ohio State team, he helped lead the Buckeyes to a national championship, a triumph that cemented his place as one of the best defensive backs in the nation. Standing at 5'10" and 200 pounds, he wasn't the tallest player, but his combination of anticipation, timing, and explosive power made him feared by opponents across the country. Wide receivers dreaded crossing the middle when Tatum was lurking, because when he hit, the impact lingered long after the whistle. Over his college career, Tatum became a three-time All-American and earned the National Defensive Player of the Year award in 1970. Woody Hayes, a coach known for his uncompromising toughness, called him perhaps the best defensive player he had ever coached. Tatum's game was more than just skill. It was psychological warfare. He didn't just tackle players, he intimidated them into mistakes. By the time the 1971 NFL Draft arrived, Jack Tatum was already a legend in the making. The Oakland Raiders, the league's renegades under John Madden, saw in him the perfect embodiment of their identity: rebellious, aggressive, and unyielding. When they selected him in the first round, it wasn't simply a draft pick. It was the beginning of a marriage between a player and a franchise that lived and breathed intimidation. From the smoke-filled streets of Passaic to the roaring glory of Ohio Stadium, Jack Tatum had transformed himself from a kid hardened by circumstance into a first-round NFL draft pick. His rise was more than a story of talent. It was the birth of a legend, a man who carried both fear and destiny into the pros. And in Oakland, that legend would find its true expression. When Jack Tatum arrived in Oakland in 1971, it wasn't just a draft pick. It was destiny. The Raiders, under fiery head coach John Madden, were already known as the NFL's outlaws. They wore black, they played on the edge of chaos, and they thrived on intimidation. They weren't simply trying to beat opponents, they wanted to break them. And in Jack Tatum, they found the perfect embodiment of that ethos. He wasn't just another defensive back. He was the hammer they had been waiting for. From the moment he slipped on the silver and black, Tatum became the enforcer in the secondary. His presence alone changed the geometry of the field. Wide receivers who once darted fearlessly across the middle suddenly thought twice, knowing the price for a catch could be a collision that would echo in their bones for days. Tatum didn't just tackle, he delivered punishment. Opponents soon learned what his nickname already promised, the assassin, and he embraced it fully. His hits were bone-crunching, almost theatrical in their violence. Tatum himself once admitted with cold precision, "I like to believe my best hits border on felonious assault." It wasn't bravado, it was a philosophy. He believed in defense as domination, intimidation as strategy. He played not only to stop you, but to make you fear him long before the ball was snapped. And the results were undeniable. Through the 1970s, Jack Tatum anchored a Raiders defense that became one of the most feared units in professional football. His career highlights piled up: a three-time Pro Bowler, 1973, 1974, 1977. The heart of a Raiders team that reached the pinnacle by winning Super Bowl XI in 1977, crushing the Minnesota Vikings 32-14. In that game, Tatum was everywhere, hammering receivers, forcing mistakes, and cementing his reputation on the sport's biggest stage, the cornerstone of a secondary that fit perfectly with the Raiders' outlaw image: daring, ruthless, unrelenting. But Tatum's legend was never just about accolades. It was about fear. Quarterbacks hesitated, receivers flinched, and even the toughest opponents admitted they thought twice when number 32 was patrolling the backfield. He didn't simply play the game. He bent it to his will, yet at the height of his dominance came the moment that would define his career in ways even he could not control. On August 12, 1978, in a preseason game against the New England Patriots, Jack Tatum collided with wide receiver Stingley on a pass over the middle. The hit was ferocious, the kind of impact that had come to define Tatum's style. But when Stingley collapsed to the turf, motionless, the stadium fell silent. He never got up again. The collision had left him paralyzed from the chest down. Football, in an instant, no longer felt like a game. It felt like tragedy. The play was not flagged. By the standards of the time, it was considered legal, yet the image of Stingley on the ground would haunt Tatum's legacy forever. He never apologized, insisting it was part of the sport, a cruel but clean football play. But to many, the incident painted him as the villain, the very face of football's violence run amok. The nickname the Assassin suddenly carried darker weight. The impact of the hit went far beyond one man's career. It ignited a national debate about the nature of football itself. How much violence was too much? Could the NFL continue to celebrate bone-crushing hits while ignoring their consequences? For years, the Stingley incident was replayed, analyzed, and dissected, with Jack Tatum at its center, a man caught between legend and infamy. And yet, even as controversy swirled, Tatum remained unapologetic. For him, football was a battlefield, and every collision a consequence of war. To remove the violence was to strip the game of its essence. That unflinching belief made him both a hero to some and a villain to others. In the end, the 1970s Raiders thrived on that duality, and Jack Tatum embodied it more than anyone. He was the blade at the heart of their identity. Sharp, dangerous, unforgettable. He reached the peak of glory, lifting the Lombardi Trophy, and he carried the burden of shadows, forever tied to one of the darkest moments in NFL history. This was the paradox of Jack Tatum at his peak: glory and fury, dominance and doubt, triumph and tragedy, all colliding in a single unforgettable career. When Jack Tatum walked away from football in 1980, he left behind more than statistics. He left behind an aura, the image of a defender who played the game with a ferocity no one could ignore. But the man off the field was not the caricature that headlines painted. Away from the roar of the crowd, Tatum was quiet, reserved, almost soft-spoken. He wrote with clarity about the violence he embodied, publishing books like They Call Me Assassin and Final Confessions of an NFL Assassin, where he reflected on both the glory and the controversy of his career. In print, his words revealed a man far more complex than the one-dimensional villain many chose to see. Life after football, however, was not kind. The very body that had once delivered bone-crushing blows began to betray him. Tatum struggled with diabetes, a relentless disease that robbed him of his mobility and ultimately cost him part of his leg. The man who had once been the most feared hitter in the NFL now fought a quieter, crueler opponent. Yet even in his suffering, he remained stoic, rarely seeking sympathy, never surrendering the edge that had defined him. On July 27, 2010, Jack Tatum passed away at just 61 years old. The assassin was gone, but his shadow remained. His death reopened old wounds and reignited debates. To some, he was a gladiator, the ultimate symbol of toughness in a brutal game. To others, he was the man who ended Darryl Stingley's career and life as he knew it. The paradox of Jack Tatum was never resolved, and maybe it never could be, because his impact went far beyond wins and losses. Tatum's style of play helped shape the NFL itself. The violence he personified forced the league to confront its own soul. In the years after his career, and especially after the Stingley incident, the NFL began tightening rules, penalizing high hits, and eventually creating the safety-first culture that dominates the modern game. Targeting penalties, defenseless receiver protections, and the rise of concussion protocols all trace their roots back to questions that Jack Tatum's career forced onto the table. In a way, the assassin changed football forever, not just by how he played, but by the reckoning his play demanded. And yet, for all the controversy, his legend endures. Watch any highlight reel of Raiders history, and you'll see him. Number 32, patrolling the secondary, delivering hits that shook entire stadiums. Ask his teammates, and they'll tell you he was the anchor of a defense that struck fear into the league. Ask his critics, and they'll tell you he was the cautionary tale of what happens when brutality overshadows humanity. Both are true, and that duality is what makes Jack Tatum unforgettable, because in the end, Jack Tatum was more than a nickname. He was a mirror held up to football itself. He showed us the beauty of controlled violence, the thrill of toughness, the edge that makes the sport electric. But he also showed us the cost, the broken bodies, the shattered lives, the moral questions that still hang over the game today. So how should we remember him? As a hero, as a villain, as the symbol of everything thrilling and everything dangerous. About football, the truth is he was all of these. Jack Tatum was greatness and caution, triumph and tragedy, the assassin and the man. And maybe that's why his legacy endures. Because in every debate about safety, every rule change, every argument about how much violence belongs in the game, the ghost of Jack Tatum still lingers. His name is a reminder that football has always walked a fine line between spectacle and sacrifice, and that some men, by the way they lived and played, can never be forgotten. Jack Tatum didn't just play defense. He defined the eternal question at the heart of the NFL. How far are we willing to go for greatness?